All right, you're here. Let's take a deep breath in. Cool. So today we're going to be talking about shadow work, and I believe that this is going to be a long video. So make sure that you're not distracted. And if you are distracted, and if I am entering important spaces or points in this topic, make sure you pause the video and give yourself some time because this is extremely significant. So you all must have heard about something called shadow work. What does that mean? It's everywhere right now. It's in TikTok, it's in therapy settings, it's in Instagram, it's in different self-help books or TikTok posts or things like that. What does this actually signify? Well, many people actually get it wrong because a lot of times in spirituality or philosophy, you get so lost in the concepts or trying to understand the definition that you actually forget to embody its true essence or recognize its true value, if that makes sense. Recognizing its significance. And there is a common misconception that your shadow is your dark side. It is evil. It is mysterious. It is dark. And it's going to consume you if you don't allow it to be free. There is some partial truths to that. But what I'm trying to say here is a lot of people make it seem to be this demonic figure. That is not what it is. And in fact, the person who discovered this or termed the concept or coined the term, whatever you want to say it, who came up with this term, his name is Carl Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, which if you've clicked on this video, I'm sure you have heard about who he is. It's not what Jung said though. Shadow is not demonic. He meant, or he emphasized on shadow being your buried gold. It is not your darkness, it is not demonic, it's your buried gold that you have not stumbled upon or actually contemplated deeply enough. So think about that for a second. And the reason it got buried will make you uncomfortable, and that's the entire essence of this video on what is that gold? How can you attain that gold? Why was that gold buried? And why is it uncomfortable? So bear with me here. Because the person who buried this gold was maybe because of external factors, but ultimately it's because of you. It comes back to you every single time, no matter how tough life gets, no matter how hard circumstances are, it always comes back to you. Whether if it's your happiness, sadness, making more money, getting into relationships, having a kid, raising a kid, we see these as external influences or external occurrences that are outside of us, but ultimately all those desires and those responsibilities that you will be taking or that you choose not to take is because of something within you that is not allowing it to happen or something within you that is wanting it to happen, right? And in that same way, your shadow is something that is within you that you choose to bury. So before we go anywhere with this video, let's try to define what the shadow actually is. Carl Jung introduced this concept as a formal psychological structure. This is not a metaphor, this is not a spiritual concept that is far end of some specific spiritual tradition or religion. It's not like that. As long as you're a human being and you have a mind, you have a shadow. Just like how I have my body here and you see the shadow projecting onto my body here on my shirt. As long as this physical thing exists and light is there, the shadow is also there. So in that same way, if you have a body and if you have a mind, regardless of your religious background, you have a shadow. So this is a psychological clinical observation of how the human psyche likes to organize itself or things that it doesn't portray outside, if that makes sense. That's why we call it the shadow. You wouldn't really pay attention to where my shadow is. You look at my external self, you look at my verbal communication, but you don't really see where my shadow is. In that same way, psychologically, I project something onto the world, but internally you can't really tell what is going on in my mind. That's one way to look at it. But deeper than that, internally, I can't tell what exactly is in my subconscious, but I need to make it conscious. So that's this game, right? And before we go deeper into what shadow is, let me talk about persona. They say personality. What does that mean? Persona is the mask that you wear to show the world who you are, right? It's a curated version of the self. Let's say on LinkedIn, I'm sure almost all of you all have been on LinkedIn. There is a specific tonality on how you portray yourself on LinkedIn. Maybe a corporate style, maybe a business style. And rather than saying, this looks good, or rather than saying, my day has been great, you might say something like, this is visually aesthetic. And today, June 7th, 2026, has been a profound experience for me. So you're just exaggerating things. But that's nothing like fake. It's not to say it's fake, right? It's more to say that you exaggerate on how you portray yourself. So that's the LinkedIn version of yourself. The one that is acceptable, the one that is nice, that the one that follows the rules and the social norms. So again, it's not fake, it's nothing bad, it's just survival. And that is persona, how you are raised, who you are, the sense of self, how you are being perceived by others. That is your persona, personality. The persona isn't something that you actually choose, even though you think that I have chosen who I am and my personality. Even you being in those desperate moments of choosing to become who you were supposed to become is not separate from the circumstances that you've gone through that made you have that choice in the first place. Think about this deeper. It was already built, and most of it was already built in your childhood itself. Programming, right? What was deemed upon you, or what you got approved of by your parents, by your teachers, by your siblings or your friends, even before you went to kindergarten, what you're supposed to eat, what you're not supposed to eat, how you should behave. Again, these are not things to say it's good or bad. These are things to just observe and keep an eye out on how we were conditioned and how we were raised. Now, when you got rejected, shamed, or punished to do certain things or of doing certain things, you said to yourself, oh, okay, this is bad. Mother won't approve it. Father won't approve it. Friends won't accept me. School will laugh at me. So let me hide this version of myself and keep it to myself. And whatever the culture has rewarded me, I will amplify that. I will bombard it further, right? Because then I get to fit in, because then I feel safe, because then I feel loved and accepted. But that's the thing. Even though it's easy for me to say, it is uncomfortable for you to investigate whatever you have suppressed previously. And again, the persona part of it is essentially a survival strategy that is hardened into an identity, right? Because without an identity or a persona that is able to fit in the society, whether if it's in the social media dynamic or social circles or at work or in classroom settings, without that, how would you survive? You would be outcasted. You would be labeled crazy. So, psychologically, we need an identity. We need a sense of purpose. We need to act how the Romans do when you're in Rome, that sort of a thing. The issue is, most people tend to believe for their entire lives that this very persona, this very conditioning, is who they are in totality. That this is all that they have, that this is all that they're capable of. But that's where I'd like you all to think and come to this recognition that it isn't the case. It is you who learned all these things and have conditioned yourself to these things in order to be safe and accepted. So there is that negotiation that you'll have with yourself that, oh, is this accepted of me? Is this not accepted of me? How much of me that is not accepted can I portray? How much of me that is accepted should I bombard further? That is that thing that you'll have within you, especially in your formative years. And and you should emphasize on this word or pay close attention to this word, the word appear, right? Not what is, what appears to be. My persona appears to be this way in this social setting, in this dynamic. So if the persona is what you show, that means the shadow is everything that you don't show, but still lingers, right? So I can be the good kid in the classroom because I am rewarded for that, but there are elements of me that wants to be naughty or that wants to be loud or disobedient that I don't show, and that is my shadow. Get it? I hope you got that. And this is where, again, I would like to repeat myself that the shadow is not darkness, it is not evil, it is not your trauma. And maybe it could be your trauma, right? Because what is trauma? It's something that repeatedly hits or repeatedly stimulates you, and that becomes a conditioned pattern, right? Trauma doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. It's just repeated exposure to a particular thing, and that becomes ingrained within you, right? So here, the shadow could be that form, but is suppressed. And whatever that didn't fit in terms of your survival, you discarded it, and that becomes your shadow. So, an example would be for an aggressive person. For an aggressive person, let's say he's in the boxing gym and he's going crazy on the heavy bag. Or if it's a person at your workspace, they get angry all the time, they get irritated all the time. Their shadow is actually tenderness, softness. They don't show it outside, but it's within them. Because socially, they have built a persona that they are this tough individual and that they are hot-headed. Sometimes they can't even help it. That's how they naturally are. Sometimes it's a learned response, a defense mechanism to show that they're strong externally, but internally, again, they're soft and they're tender. And and not many people would know about them, about those people being soft and tender. And for a shy person, on the other hand, someone who can't stand for themselves, someone who can't speak confidently, for people like those, their shadow self tends to be assertiveness and confidence. So maybe at work you can't stand up for yourself, but when you come home, you're able to maybe do a workout, go to the gym, or play a video game where you're able to be assertive, be confident, be charismatic because you were not able to do so in social settings or in work settings. So that's how that dynamic plays. And Jung calls this a compensatory role for the shadow in order to balance shy outside, assertive inside, assertive outside, shy inside. That balance, the compensatory balance, right? Because balance is needed. If there is no balance and you overindulge in one persona and ignore the other, there is an imbalance and there might be identity crisis or existential crisis, either because of unbalanced energy or because of unbalanced meaning through that persona, if that makes sense. So there should be a good compartmentalization of who you are in specific settings. That's something I have an issue with. Sometimes at my work, I tend to be too deep or analytical and over the top, which might be too much for people. And at home, I tend not to give myself some ease or rest to this personality of go, 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 and I'm always feeling restless. So I, as an individual, have to balance, okay, how am I being portrayed or how am I being seen at social or work settings? You don't have to be too deep, Jay. Just be outgoing and connect with people. Don't get too deep. But when it comes to your videos, be deep, be authentic, be raw, and try to balance the best of both worlds. That's just an example. I didn't really get into my shadow here. It was just an example to show you what that compensatory aspect means. And also, again, when it comes to the unbalanced side, the more rigidly that you maintain a specific persona, the denser the shadow becomes. So the more assertive or authoritative that you are in social settings, the more softer and shyer you become in settings that people don't see you, right? Or gentler or tender, because it needs to balance. And if you don't allow it to balance, you're going to feel the blockage and you're going to feel suffocated or frustrated. So, Jung writes about this, talks about this in Psychology and Religion, that everyone carries a shadow and it is embodied in an individual's conscious life. And the blacker it is and the denser it is, the the more harder it is for you to unblock those chains, if that makes sense. Now, I think I've talked about the burying of the goal, right? The burying of the shadow, right? Why do I call it gold? Well, Jung, in one of his works, he describes the shadow as containing pure gold. Pure gold. Now, this could be, at least for me, in my case, it is creativity. There are things that I suppress externally because I know that people won't understand or get my perspective of deep thinking. So I suppress my creativity, and that is my gold. That is my shadow. And if it wasn't for me creating this video or YouTube videos in general, I am suppressing my gold. I am choosing to bury it, right? So this could be your creativity. Maybe it could be your ambition. It could be your sensitivity. It could be your tenderness. It could be your passion. It could be your desire. It could be your anger, your humor, your wildness, your refusal to be conformative to society or authoritative figures. All of this is not good or bad. It's just your buried gold, which is your shadow. And none of it was buried because it was bad. It was buried because it was inconvenient. It was inconvenient for your parents. It was inconvenient for your teachers. It was inconvenient for your culture, your authoritative figures, your community. And for most of the time, because of other people's discomfort, you have limited your wholeness and you've built a shadow around it. You have built a cage around the gold. So it's not just buried, but there is a cage that is built around it. And you're not willing to open that cage because it's going to cause inconvenience for people. So, again, the shadow is not a problem, it's a buried treasure, and you just need to figure out how you can channel it in the right ways so that you're able to feel whole. And the issue with this is that most people have been living with this suffocation for years, and 90% or 80% of the people die without recognizing what goal that they possessed, because everybody's trapped in the survival needs of needing a job, of needing to make money, of having sex, of having kids, of living the mediocre life, which is not bad. It is part of survival. It is part of your responsibilities and your desires. But you completely miss out on the creative potential or aspects of yourself that you have buried while you are trying to maintain the survival needs. So think about a well-behaved kid who was raised to be polite, who was told to avoid conflict, who was told to never raise their voice or be assertive. They suppress their capacity or the need of being healthily aggressive, of healthily drawing boundaries. But guess what? Now they can't set boundaries. They are unable to stand up for themselves. They can't advocate for themselves. And unfortunately, the shadow isn't anger in this specific case, although it could be. I would say that the shadow here is more of the suppressed anger that could have been a healthy assertion, right? So it's not that they have been raised to be nice and polite and their shadow is just anger. It could be, but I would say more so that their shadow in this position is to draw healthy boundaries or be healthily assertive. Maybe in my tone right now, I might sound a little direct and assertive. That's because usually in social settings, I am not like that. So this is how it's coming about through the creative expression. So most kids these days, in the mode of wanting to be politically correct or wanting to be accepted, they choose to be fake on the outside because they're unable to draw healthy boundaries or make claims with appropriate reasoning because they have never been taught that. In the school system, I'm sure all of you have been told to obey and to not question the authority. But questioning doesn't mean that we be rebellious and project hate onto others. Questioning means you're trying to understand a concept or a dynamic deep enough for you to actually maybe convince yourself or decide on whether or not you will follow. And that requires healthy assertion, boundary, and questioning. So many students, many kids, many people my age, older, younger, whoever it is, as long as you're a human being, a lot of us are not trained on how to deal with this healthy assertion. And that kid who was thought to be polite, to not question, to be politically correct or whatever, they have buried the thing that they may have needed the most. And they might even get bullied for that point. Or you could be an ambitious kid, right? You are an ambitious kid with such passion, such hunger, such drive to live life. But you were always told that no, you have to be humble. You can't have specific desires because that is you being too selfish. And you have to prioritize what this community wants or what this family wants. And you are being an arrogant kid. Why? Because you're being too ambitious and this is too much for us to wrap our heads around. So we will label you arrogant so that you can follow our footsteps and not be ambitious or not follow your calling. So in this case, for that specific child or kid, the ambition or the drive becomes a shadow. They choose not to integrate because it was rejected by their family. So every time that success is within the reach of the ambitious person, they might have an imposter syndrome like feeling, or they might have a feeling of self deprecation, deprecation, anyway, self sabotage. Let's put it that way. Can't get that word right. But yeah, so this doesn't mean that the ambitious person was lazy. It was just because as soon as they felt some form of success that was strongly connected to their drive and identity, they sabotage it because they were always told that they're not supposed to be that ambitious. That's the issue with a lot of Eastern communities because they're so collectivistic in nature that they forget to emphasize on the significance of the individual to outgrow. Although I would say that both individual and collective are equally important. And one last example in this shadow aspect for you to understand is a gifted kid, right? Maybe you were praised only when you were achieving something, or that you have gotten good marks or good grades in your high school or college settings. Maybe your performance was great at the job. Even though you worked less, what matters is the A grade. What matters is the KPIs, not about your behaviors, but the results, the results, the results, and you are gifted in that way. So let's mold you and shape you more in that way. And forget about your emotions, forget about your actual passions. Let's focus only on the results. So that those parts become shadow, and this area becomes advertised and becomes the persona, right? That's another way to look at it. And that's where in this results driven society, we consider sensitivity, playfulness, emotional depth, spirituality, all of this as irrelevant because it is not bringing anything material in existence. It's all wishful thinking, as one might say it, or as a conservative would say it. And that's just a joke, but you get the idea. So it's important to know that the shadow is not what makes you dangerous. It's actually what makes you diminished if you are unable to recognize its potential and channel it properly. It's like this. Another good example. You're growing a tree, but you're planting a seed first. And once it grows, you're seeing the bark, you're seeing the branches, the leaves, the fruits, all of that, and it's humongous. It's beautiful. But you don't see the roots. The roots are deep, deep, deep within the soil. And it's not without the root that the tree has grown the way it has grown. So, in that way, think about the dynamic of the shadow being the root and the persona being the tree. You need both. I'm not calling one fake, I'm not calling one a liar or an imposter. They have to create the tree on however they want to create. That's up to them. But they also have to recognize that the roots are strong. Because if the roots are not strong, it will diminish the tree. And in that same way, if the shadow is not strong and channeled properly, it will diminish your identity or sense of self. This is actually a little reverse of how, when I talk about purpose or dharma, I talk about something external, having a goal in mind and connecting it to your internal motivation and going it that way. But in this shadow element, I actually am going reverse. I want you to go within and opposite, not outward. So when you go inwards and opposite, you're able to connect the roots and then connect back to your purpose and your dharma, which makes it more holistic, right? More integrated. That's what's important. And the shadow is always functioning, but is not fully alive, right? When you are in those social settings and you are being authoritative or assertive, the part that wants to be soft, that wants to be sensitive, is not fully alive there, but it's still functioning. It's somewhere in your head, somewhere in your mind. And this actually creates a challenge or a situation for many people. As Jung calls this a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. Because it's not like a Halloween costume that you're just going to wear. Okay, I'm choosing to be sensitive now. I'm choosing to be assertive now. Sometimes it just happens because of life, because of flow of events. And if you like to understand this concept deeper, beyond of whatever I'm saying here, then you have to read The Modern Man in Search of a Soul. That's a book from Carl Jung. So I would recommend looking into that. How does something so valuable end up hidden? And why is that the case? I've already repeated that in my previous explanations within this video, but let's just revisit it. It comes down to a part of you that has been running the show ever since you could speak, which is the ego. Again, the persona aspect. Now, you have probably heard a lot of spiritual concepts telling you that the ego is the enemy, that you have to kill the ego, and that you have to dissolve the ego, and that you have to transcend the ego. And that is true, but that's true for specific cases, especially for those individuals who really want to connect with God in a deeper way. In a deeper way. I'm talking about such purity like Christ, such purity like a mystic that you might have seen or read about, where they are fully surrendered to the divine. And one might argue they are the divine. Why? Because they're so pure. There is no sense of I, there is no ego. Right? But what about normal people like us, you and I? What about us who are having a family, who are surviving, who are needing to make money, needing to do other things or responsibilities that they're expected to do in a society? We can't fully transcend our ego, we can't kill it. We have to have a healthy understanding of how to operate with it, and at the same time show grace, gratitude, and thanks to the divine. There has to be a healthy balance, unless you want to be a monk or a priest where you renounce everything and you are completely immersed. But that's like maybe 2 or 1% of the world, maybe less than that. So Carl Jung here disagreed with this aspect or idea of trying to kill the ego or dissolve the ego. And this is where Jung gets separated from the Eastern traditions. Although in his work he talks a lot about the significance of the East and the shadow and astrology and all of that. This is where I think it differs a little bit. Not fully, because within the Eastern traditions they talk about the benefits of having a healthy ego. But the main case here is that Jung emphasizes on not bypassing spirituality, not bypassing your ego, right? Again, the ego is not the enemy, it's a necessary tool that you utilize in order to navigate in this reality. It is an important part of who we are. And without the ego, you can't function. Without the ego, I wouldn't be able to speak. You wouldn't be able to listen to me speaking. We need to have some sense of I to navigate. Otherwise, you can't make decisions. Otherwise, you won't have the identity. And again, this is where Jung said that the ego is the tip of the iceberg, but don't mistake that tip of the iceberg becoming the entire iceberg, because the parts of the iceberg that are submerged underwater is your unconscious, is parts of you that people don't see, that you haven't seen yourself. And there are parts of you that your ego doesn't want you to recognize or know because it is scary. Why would you want to encounter parts of you that you have never encountered, that you never knew that exist within you? Isn't it terrifying? Because you always want to convince yourself that your ego convinces yourself into thinking that you're absolutely fine and perfect. But that's where most of the problems in the world emerge, that people aren't able to sit in silence or reflect well enough to investigate and see how they can be wrong, how they can do the unfortunate things or be the issue in the relationships or workspace. So the ego's job is to protect you from danger, from uncertainty, from physical or psychological death. And every time you grow, every time you transform, what is transformation? You are transcending something outside of you, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally too. And every time you transform into something new, an old version of you dies. This is where you can say the hero's arc or locking in phase or whatever you want to call it, that thing that drives you. Why do we like to watch anime or movies? Is because the hero is on a journey, and through that journey the hero transforms, right? The hero's beliefs die, maybe their old beliefs die, your old beliefs die, your old behaviors die, your patterns die, new people enter your life, old people go away, ends of relationships, rebirthing of new relationships. The ego is terrified of all of this because the ego wants to be in control and it doesn't want to lose control, right? So that's essentially what the ego is. It is a safeguard mechanism for you to have certainty, control, and identity in order for you to navigate reality. It's not a bad thing, but if you're too dependent on it, or if your ego is extremely strong, it prevents you from looking into your shadow or being considerate about other people or the collectivistic needs. So, with this intent of needing to survive, of wanting to have control, of wanting to be portrayed in a certain way so that you're accepted, the ego unconsciously cages and buries the gold. Literally, what I was talking about 15 minutes ago. And this is actually an illusion because there is no safety. It's just a makeup of the mind. And again, it's easy for me to put this into words because I'm speaking about this, because I've taken notes that I'm seeing right now and I'm talking about it. But when it comes to recognizing it and actually sitting with it and be like, this is what they have told me. This is how I've taken the information. This is how I've processed it. And this is how this is part of my new persona. Then you're like, okay, they just ignited a flame. I choose to let the fire continue. And that gap between the ignition and burning the entire stick out, that is an illusion that you can prevent through introspection and self-awareness. That's where, again, safety doesn't exist. Everything is risky, but the ego wants everything to be safe and contained. And just for that matter, you can be convinced into playing small your whole life, of living a shallow life, of living a comfortable life. But even when you do that, maybe life shakes things up. Maybe you could get hit by a bus. Maybe you suppress all your desires and you try to be all fake and nice for some reason, and you could still die because of cancer or because someone shot you or something. I'm not trying to make it too negative, but what I'm trying to say is if we try to live small, we never know what life does to us to test them, and it's unpredictable. So be careful. It's good to be aware, it's good to be mindful, it's good to be cautious, but it's not good to over control and live out of fear and live out of survival, right? It is important for you to recognize the ego and the controlling aspect, but don't let it control you. In my example, content creation aspects, my ego is always telling me, in a sense, again, it's not something that I have a dialogue with, it's something that we are. There is no two, it's only one here. But we like to communicate it as two different versions because that's how the language works, right? My ego is trying to protect me from Jay, don't say the wrong thing. How are you going to be perceived by someone who is listening to this? Are they going to call you crazy? Is there a risk in this video that you're making? Will you make sense? Is the channel going to grow? All of these things linger in my mind. It's trying to protect me, and that's healthy. But at the same time, it is good to recognize it and be like, okay, great. I see where you're coming from. I have it checked. But at the same time, I will still continue to create the content while recognizing the risks, while recognizing the disadvantage or the advantages. And that's important. And it's also important for you to recognize that if you choose to live the way that you're living right now, out of ego, out of fear, out of survival, are you going to end up looking back at your life and regretting and realizing that you've never lived your actual desires, your actual wants, because you wanted to just survive? And that is the risk that the ego doesn't want you to take because it's scared. But once you do take it, you grow, you evolve, and you form new patterns, and you have new identity or personas or ego, and that creates a new tier, and you keep pushing forwards. That's why we call it self-improvement. It's not just one baseline that you hit and it's permanent for the rest of the life. No, that's where spirituality and religion comes in to transcend beyond. But I'm going too deep on that end, the ego aspect. Let's come back to the shadow aspect. So far we have talked about what shadow is and why that it gets buried. And both of them can sound abstract, but I hope that with my explanations you have gotten a deeper understanding of what it is that I'm trying to say. So now, rather than the shadow being a concept, I want you to continue this video with me from the lens or perspective of the shadow being something that actually runs your life, right? And in this case, I would say the shadow and the ego are interconnected in that way too. And I'm sure by this point you're able to make those connections. Now, let's look at it from the suppression perspective. The shadow, again, doesn't disappear. When I told you that it functions um, behind your mind, even though you're in a setting. So, like I mentioned in an earlier example, you could be assertive and you could be showing your authoritativeness in a social setting, but the shy and the tenderness still lingers. It's not that it has disappeared, it still lingers. So, when you bury that part of yourself, it doesn't disappear, it still lingers. And it doesn't sit quietly, it is waiting for you to come back. And if you don't come back to it, it builds pressure, it grows, and eventually it might come out in ways that you have not expected. So this is where I would term it as eruption, right? So the deeper and denser your shadow becomes and you can't let it out, it may come out in high stress moments. It may come out in exhaustive moments. It may come out um, in other ways that you have never thought of. So, a good example here is any of our authoritative figures. When they are being nice to us, when they are being generous to us and sweet to us, but once we do test their patience, they lash out. And sometimes they don't even know why they did. Maybe it was some frustration that they have not only built upon because of us, but it was also because of whatever they have gone through with their friends or families a few days prior, till they met you and you triggered them in some unintentional way and they lashed on you, right? So that's an eruption. That's the shadow projecting out because it wasn't tamed properly. That's why for a lot of people who have energy or are in authoritative positions, it is good to practice martial arts because they're able to transmit that energy of frustration in a healthy way. But if you don't do martial arts, if you don't do gym, if you don't do yoga, if you don't do anything that is healthy to let the shadow out, it becomes an addiction. This is where people get into drinking alcohol, smoking weed, smoking cigarettes when they're stressed, whatever. That becomes a new cycle. And that is something that we have to be careful about. It could also come during relationships as well, where rather than having a good conversation with your partner, you may lash onto your partner or your partner may lash onto you. And that can cause destruction, right? So it can come out in ways, if you don't integrate your shadow well enough, it can come out in ways where and moments where you may not like yourself for that shadow aspect, or people start avoiding you or disliking you because of that shadow aspect. And it can be pretty ugly, right? It's not a good feeling. But again, if you neglect, if you have a lion locked in a cage and you make it starve, of course, the moment that the cage is opened, the lion is not going to be friendly or calm. It's going to pounce on you. And that's how the shadow works too. So the kind and polite person suddenly explodes. The disciplined or the high achiever who was always on top of everything has one bad day and starts to indulge in other things that he was not supposed to indulge in, and he wrecks his entire week. Right? A spiritual seeker or a guru, so many gurus out there, right, these days. or people like myself too, uh, people who want to portray themselves. I mean, I try not to, but if I am, I try to be mindful about it. But people who are in guru settings or spiritual settings or are speakers, they try to portray themselves as this washy, perfect people, and maybe in some of the moments they have imperfections, and that comes out in their speech, that comes out in their behaviors with other people, because they were unable to integrate their shadow even though they speak about spirituality. and and that's something that shocks their followers or people that they trusted, or the people that trusted them, right? So it's not bad luck, it's not weakness, it's just that the shadow was never fully integrated, and you haven't channeled it properly, so now it's trying to control you. And to back up this point, there is a small, I think it's a video or a short film. It's called the, I don't know how you even pronounce his name. It's actually on my screen right now. Uh, Jekyll and Hyde. So there is this movie, short movie or story written by Robert Stevenson in the year 1886 that Carl Jung actually referenced to many times. Um, it's called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And many people think it's a horror story, but Jung actually saw this from a psychological perspective and beautifully explained about the shadow. So the doctor, Jekyll, he wants to be good. He wants to be pure. He wants to be respectable. The man who serves people as a good doctor, right? So he tries to suppress these emotions of his that is imperfect, that is selfish, that is cruel, all of that. And the suppression becomes so extreme that what he has buried, that is a shadow, becomes a natural automatic response in certain scenarios. Again, here, the Jackal and Mr. Hyde are not two separate people. It's one person, but one is the shadow and one is the actual persona. So Mr. Hyde here is Mr. Jekyll's shadow, if that makes sense. So whenever Mr. Hyde is portraying himself as this wonderful doctor that is serving humanity, Mr. Hyde is right there within himself, the suppressed version of himself that he has never let out. And Mr. Hyde decides to take action without Mr. Jekyll's consent during moments of triggers. So if you see the movie or the show, you will understand that there are parts and elements of the story where Mr. Jekyll doesn't have control over Mr. Hyde, and he just takes the entire control, and it terrifies everybody else. It's just a symbolic definition of how the shadow can be. It's not to be taken literally, especially if you see the movie, or at least parts of it. Don't call me crazy for that. But yes, that would be the most dangerous part of the shadow, which is projection. And all of us have projections, just like how we have shadows. I have projections, you have projections. We all do. And the reason why it's dangerous is because you can't really see certain projections within yourself. And you see those very projections in other people and you judge them for it. But ultimately, it was actually your shadow after all. It wasn't actually them, it was actually you. And this is a hard thing to grasp. Even I fail to recognize it time to time. I judge people, unfortunately, sometimes. It's survival. But then I try to go back, recollect, think deeper, and I'm like, hey, did I actually project my insecurity onto them because they exercise dominance in this setting, to which I actually could have been that guy, but I couldn't be. So that's why I started feeling insecure and started projecting. So it could go off of that tangent. And that would actually mean that you don't really hate that person. You actually hate the parts of yourself that you were not able to exercise or recognize, but you saw that in them, right? So the projection can be you judging someone, or it could also be you erupting in a specific case, just like how I mentioned Mr. Hyde in the previous example. So Jung actually talks about it. He says everything that irritates us could be a beautiful indicator on how we can understand ourselves. So anything and everything that irritates us about another person or specific community, if we are able to dissect it deeper, we are able to understand ourselves more than the others because they were the ones that we have projected onto, if that makes sense. And this is not just to say it's an individual shadow. There is also the collective shadow. And Carl Jung warned about this because guess what? My man was in Germany area or Switzerland area, and this was in 1930s, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. It was during the, I don't know if it's during or the timeline was really close. I can say that for sure. The Germany, the Nazism, all of that, it was a collective shadow. They were projecting hate onto Jews. There was no specific reasoning, it's just that they disliked them, and that was a collective shadow. He saw he saw an entire civilization being projected, being having shame projected onto them, right? And in a book called Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, he wrote that the tendency to see one's shadow out there in a specific person or group of people is the most dangerous aspect of the modern psyche. Think about that. Think about that. It's not just the historical lens of Germany. Look at the world right now. Look at the social media right now. I don't care if you are far right or far left or right in the middle. It doesn't matter. I just want you to look at it from a spiritual, psychological lens. Look at how people talk about Trump like he's the devil. Look at how people talk about immigrants like if there are some infestation. Look at how everyone is on Twitter or Instagram commenting this, commenting that. There is no deeper understanding of what the factors are, of what the dynamics are. It's just impulsive reactions. Why is that the case? It's a projection. There are some parts of ourselves that does not like, which then is able to have a great excuse of shifting the blame or judging other people, right? So if a politician does something corrupt, even though he has done great amounts of things, whether if he's from the red or from the blue, doesn't matter. If he's done one thing wrong, that's it. His case is over. You have further solidified your judgment upon them. You haven't seen them as a human being or as a soul, but you're seeing them as a person who's associated with this political party, and all that narrative in your head of whatever you've made has a stronger reason on why you have to maintain that narrative more so than ever. And that is your projection. There is no deeper understanding again. So, so know that a lot of us don't go by with the right analysis or don't have a righteous reason to be angry. Our planet, unfortunately, is full of people who have never heard of shadow work. Forget about doing shadow work. They've never heard of something called shadow work, and they're just projecting their disowned self onto others for convenient reasons. The left projects onto the right projects onto the left. And for some reason, especially in the Middle East and other places, everyone is certain that gods and history are on their side. They don't actually take the time to recognize what their shadow is, what the divine is. How can they be an actual service to humanity and to God? And again, the world isn't on fire because people are evil. The world is on fire because nobody is choosing to do the heavy lifting. Nobody is choosing to do the inner work. And again, that's where the shadow has to go somewhere. So if you don't integrate it, it will come in form of projection, in form of hate, in form of um, anger, frustration, all of that. So let's forget about the geopolitical stuff for now and let's come back to your life, right? The person who triggers you the most is you. The personality type that you can't stand, the behavior that makes you go bananas or furious. All of this is not a coincidence. This is your shadow speaking. This is your psyche projecting itself onto you, right? From your point of view. But again, all of these things, if you're able to recognize and sit with, they are beautiful indicators on where you're actually supposed to work. And don't make the mistake of blaming other people or getting triggered. Don't do that. Investigate on why you are triggered, on why you hate somebody unrighteously. Most of us misinterpret righteous anger with unrighteous anger. And I would say 80% of the people have unrighteous anger. So, Jay, how do I find the shadow? How do I figure this out? I'm convinced that I want to integrate my shadow and I want to work on it. How do I integrate it? Boy, give it to me right now. Well, that's the thing. This is where people actually get stuck on. They read about shadow work or they hear about it on Instagram Reel and they're like, oh, darkness, oh, shadow. But they don't actually work on it. They get excited, but they don't actually sit down to do the work. And you can't think your way through it. You can't just label something and be like, oh, that is my shadow. Oh, I'm projecting this way, and that's it. No, no. You have to do the actual work. You have to keep recollecting. You have to keep revisiting certain patterns in certain scenarios that you expose yourself to or that you get triggered for. And the term I'd like to use, even though I can say patterns, I would say fingerprints. So let's say this phone right here. I'm leaving a fingerprint, right? I'm leaving a pattern and I can revisit that fingerprint again because I know I left it there. So any interactions, any thoughts, any triggers that I have is a fingerprint that I'm leaving. And once you're able to notice your fingerprint and your patterns, you can't unsee it. And this is not something that I can teach you as a theory or that I'm able to identify for you. Maybe if we work in a one-on-one setting, I can definitely do that. But ultimately, you being part of the audience right now, it is only you who can identify your patterns and your fingerprints. Can go on the extent of giving you three mirrors though, which can help you out on how you can navigate these fingerprints. I can't pinpoint it to you, but I can kind of direct you to how and where you should look. And that's where I'm going to take you through these three different mirrors, and you don't have to take notes. I honestly don't think anybody would these days. But yes, you don't have to take notes. You don't have to memorize this. I just want you to visualize this. I just want you to be with me here and try to visualize certain patterns as I continue to speak. And let the mind do whatever it's doing. Let it automatically map out scenarios. Let it automatically make connections. And the mapping is the work. This is way better than literally writing it down. So the first mirror, I would say, are your triggers, right? So this is not small frustrations. This is big irritations. These are disproportionate reactions, extreme anger or disgust that you feel towards certain people or behaviors. And you're able to navigate on how intense this is by actually observing the intensity of your emotions or of the reactions to these specific triggers or signals. So pay attention next time, especially let's say politically or maybe racially or maybe in a work setting where if there is someone whose behavior is triggering you, right? Why did they say it the way they said? Instead of cursing them out in your mind, try to investigate and see why am I being triggered with their mode of expression or with who they are. Maybe because there is a need that is not being met within me. Maybe because there is a part of me that wants to be like them but can't fully be like them. Maybe because I am failing to recognize where they're coming from because there is something within me that is choosing to not actually understand them. There could be many ways, but it's important. Mirror number one, notice your triggers and notice the intensity of the triggers. Mirror number two, what you were told not to be, right? Go back to your childhood. Go back to your parts of yourself that was discouraged, that was shamed, that was humiliated, that was punished, that was not accepted in a friend group because you were of certain type. What did you hear over and over again? Right? You are too sensitive. Don't be so dramatic. Stop showing off. Be a man. You are a girl. That is not for people like us. You think too much. Don't get your hopes up. This world is pretty cynical. Be realistic. You know, all these labels or judgments that were put onto you, try to investigate what exactly the narrative was while you were growing up as a kid. That is your second mirror. And in these lines that I mentioned, some of you all might have found your fingerprints there. So, whatever someone has told you that you are not or how you're supposed to be, and you had to suppress that part of you, that is your fingerprint. That is a pattern that you might have to revisit and see if there is a part of you that still wants to be that way that was suppressed previously, but now you're able to identify that and you're able to let it out in a healthy manner. And the third mirror and the last one is envy, right? Envy. Pay attention to what you envy or become jealous of. Um, because in a way, being envious is not really bad. It's actually a healthy indicator of what you actually want in the world, of how you want to be shaped into. But if you are too envious and you don't take action, that becomes unhealthy. And that is your shadow, right? So, um, let's say you watch a creator speak about a specific topic that you actually care about, and you've always thought of creating content on that topic, but you chose not to, and then you end up seeing this creator talk about it, and you do feel a little envious. So rather than being envious for that matter, and then deciding to go to the gym and flex your biceps or whatever, and then have sense of authority, try to create that content. Try to talk about what that spoken talked about. So then you're able to actually integrate that shadow aspect that felt envious, right? So try to notice that it could also be a trigger, but yes, envy. Envy, envious is something that we all have. Being envy is something that we all have, but it's a very subtle thing because it's not hate, it's not anger, it's not judgment, it's just subtle jealousy. So so whenever you feel weird or you feel complicated or you feel a little jealous towards a community or a specific person, recognize that aspect and question it and go deeper and try to integrate that. So to revisit this point, again, shadow is not your darkness. It is it is not something that you are like you're not selling your soul to the devil or any of that bullshit. It's just embracing parts of yourself that you have chosen not to embrace. It is embracing those parts of yourself that you instead became impulsive and just were absolutely unconscious towards. And this is not necessarily integration. This is possession. If you're choosing to recognize the dark aspects and rather than channeling it them properly, you choose to let those aspects of you control you, and you're like, oh yeah, this is my shadow. I am being angry right now. This is my shadow. I'm in both. No, that's not what it is. That's not the right way of integrating shadow. That's your shadow possessing you and you utilizing your shadow as an excuse to not take responsibility and project hate onto other people. And a lot of people, even though they don't know what shadow is, they understand this dynamic and they utilize this as an excuse to do bad in this world. And you don't want to end up like that. That is the difference between a hero and a villain. Both might go through the same circumstances, but the hero decides to rise above those circumstances, not be a victim, and do something good. Whereas the villain has the same circumstances, realizes that, oh, these circumstances made him for who he is, and decides to do something negative to the society or to the world because he has an excuse and he doesn't rise above it. He utilizes as an excuse to project more hate. But of course, you need both dynamics, otherwise, you can't have a villain without a hero or a hero without a villain. But that's us entering non duality and other deep concepts, which we'll talk about later. But going back to shadow, make sure that you integrate it. And once you integrate it, it's actually more dignified and more peaceful than what you can imagine. It's the peace after the storm, if that makes sense. And it's something that really wants to be integrated, and it wants you to consciously recognize it and give attention to in a healthy way. Not overly attentive, but healthy attention. It's about meeting these buried parts of yourself that you have chosen never to look into. But this time you look at them into their eyes and say that I see you, I have neglected you, you belong to me. Let's work on this together right now. And that's how you evolve. That's how you actually ascend. So going back to these examples that I mentioned earlier in the video, the aggressive person doesn't become more aggressive or doesn't become soft. The aggressive person who integrates their shadow becomes assertive in a healthy way, is able to maintain boundaries in a healthy way, is able to exercise power in a healthy way, wherein he's able to utilize empathy, awareness, sensitivity in right moments, and at the same time maintain a healthy boundary and be assertive, right? So you stop exploding or being angry and calling it your shadow. You're saying, oh, this is my shadow. I need to be more sensitive. Okay, let me balance it out. That's how you're doing it. So you're not erupting, if that makes sense. You are choosing it in a healthy way to drive you towards a forward and a cleaner direction. And for the shy person who integrates their shadow, they don't become an arrogant person necessarily. They become more confident, more responsible. They are able to stand up for themselves, right? They stop hiding from opportunities or people or outcomes. They're no longer afraid of it because they have integrated their shadow. The high achiever is now not gonna self-sabotage themselves for achieving something. They recognize it as their duty, as their natural desire, and they'll own that achievement and they'll shackle the judgments off of their parents or their culture or whatever they were conditioned to in their growing up years. So again, shadow integration doesn't make you darker or villainous. It only makes you whole. It only makes you more content. It only makes you more responsible and clear in your sense of judgment and purpose. And Jung writes this in one of his works. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light or La La Land. He didn't say La La Land, I just added it. But by making the darkness conscious, right? You can't always visualize positivity and become toxic positive. You have to be able to recognize parts of yourself that are dark and accept them. And from there, recognize the light. It becomes more grounded, it becomes more whole, it becomes more pure because you're not rejecting something of yourself, you're recognizing that part of yourself. Sit with that. And also know that transformation does not work until and unless you're able to transcend a part of yourself. But before you transcend that part of yourself, you have to recognize the part that was already there, that existed. And that's where the integration aspect works again. This is a deeper layer of what I was adding. I'm saying the same thing, I'm just repeating it from a different perspective. And this is not a light, shiny work. This is an honest, deep, authentic work that takes time. And this is where, if you are looking to work with a coach or a guru or a healer, you have to make sure that they have walked through this path of recognizing their shadow, of recognizing their weaknesses, of recognizing their darkness parts. And by darkness, again, not the bad parts necessarily, parts that they have not shown you. You can see that they're comfortable with that. And it's only those type of people who are fully integrated or are in the way of integrating their shadow. It's only with those individuals that you're able to work with. And those individuals have earned the right to hold space, to speak, to walk with other people. And you can't guide anybody unless you have worked upon it yourself. You can't guide people through the territory till you have crossed the entire territory of the map, or things outside the map too that you don't see. As they say, the map is not the territory, right? So that's also another thing. If you're listening to speakers like me or others, don't just merely believe us. Try to question us too. Try to see where we're coming from. Try to see if the person is comfortable with their shadow, if they're authentic, if they're real, right? The best teachers, the best therapists, the best healers, the best speakers, the best spiritual guides, all of these people have one thing in common, that they have been through something real, that their wound is not their weakness, the wound is their qualification, their wound is a testament of whatever they have gone through to overcome parts of themselves. And this is why spiritual teachers or speakers who have never went through anything deep or significant always feel slightly off, always feel fake, right? Because anybody can read a quote from the books, anybody can post about a spiritual story on Instagram, anyone can run a workshop, but if there is no depth there, if you don't feel that authenticness, then what's the point? They skip the most important part and they are lying to themselves. So, to just be mindful of who you consume, whose information you consume for that matter. So integration is not dramatic. It doesn't happen through one breakthrough moment or watching a video. It happens slowly. It's it's very subtle. It's one trigger at a time. It's one mirror at a time, and one maybe projection at a time. And going back to the example of you burying or locking it in a cage, it takes time for you to unbury the shadow, unlocking the cage, opening the cage, sitting with that, and connecting with it. It takes time. And people who do this consistently over years, not weeks, not months, over years, only then they become genuinely who they are meant to be. They become whole. You eventually will become whole if you're able to put in the effort gradually over a long period of time. In my previous video, I talked about the significance of having God or Dharma or purpose, right? And I said that you needed to have a higher standard that you can work towards, something that is larger than the ego, than the personal identity that you're able to propel forwards with, right? But here's the paradox that I'd like you to sit with in this video. The path towards the higher standard lies only through integrating the shadow. It runs through the shadow, because if you don't know what exactly you're capable of, or what your weaknesses are, or what your shadow part is, how would you know what your entire purpose would look like? There wouldn't be clarity. There wouldn't be strong foundations in your vision and purpose. And you can't just build around it. You have to build through it. You have to build through the shadow, the current self and the future self. It's all interconnected. It's not separate. So don't confuse that. right? You can't become someone capable of surrendering to something greater than yourself if you're still hiding from parts of yourself, if you're still lying to yourself, if you can't answer deep questions about yourself. How can you enter a purified state of mind before recognizing the unpure parts of yourself? Sit with that. Sit with that. The shadow and the divine are not opposites. The shadow is the key to the doorway of entering the divine space. So remember that. And this is where purity, truth, Christ consciousness, God, love, all of this enter the chat after you have recognized the other aspects that were within you. Until then, how can you even forgive yourself if you're lying to yourself, right? It's only when you actually walk towards truth that you're able to see all of this. So know that your triggers could have been your teachers, society, conditioning, parents, cultures, whatever. Your wound that you carry is your wisdom. Your shadow is the unfinished part of yourself that you are yet to integrate, and the real work is actually going into the dark and finding this gold that has always been within you and will continue to be there till your death. So that's all for now. Let's all take a deep breath together. All right. I hope this was helpful. I will see you all in the next one.